Esports pools, take one.
Esports pools features fantasy.
Glasses!
Oh, right, yeah, my bad.
Esports pools, take 15.
Esports pools features fantasy and betting
Where are the hands? I want to see the hands. If we just wanted to hire you to sit there, we'd hire fucking DDK.
All right.
Pools, take 27.
Esports pools features fantasy and betting for CSGO.
Less handsy, you are not a mime. Take 450.
Their live in-play betting allows users to experience the game in a new...
What? What is it now?
Their live in-play betting allows users to experience the game in a new... fuck. Right, what's my motivation? What am I doing in this scene again?
You're playing a character who actually cares about Counter-Strike, not just money. Take 689.
In-play betting generates different bets from round to round as you watch a live match.
Go again from the top.
What was wrong this time? We usually have it by the fucking 400th take.
Go again from the top.
You're getting on my fucking wick. You want me to come over there and wrap that fucking camera around your head?
Take 890.
During a live match. You know what? Hold, cut. You know what? I can't work under these conditions. Get the fuck out.
You can't do that.
Then I'll make them all myself, won't I?
These things take planning.
Yeah, well, you know what? I'll just make up a bunch of shit. I'll say Skrilla. I'll gesticulate a lot, and you can get the fuck out.
And how are you going to manage without us?
Now, NA as a region in CSGO will be very strong in a year or two, probably about that time span, due to the fact that most of its top talent at the moment is actually pretty young and still has a lot of time to develop, both in terms of experience in their career and in terms of their actual age as human beings and where you normally expect a player to be at when he's going to be a top player. So when we look at NA's talent... So here we are. I've got a list of like current top NA players, and I've got their age on the left. So Ethan 17, but then on the right, I've got roughly the amount of time I consider them to have been a pro. And when I say a pro, I mean like competing against good teams, not just playing in like Cal main. I mean, there's no Cal anymore. What the fuck am I talking about? It's ESEA Open or whatever it might be, some lower level league. I'm talking about actually like near the pro level versus other good top players. And you can see there. So we have a look down the list. The majority of these players are young. I mean, I've added in JKS and Azza there because, yes, technically they're not from NA, but they compete in the NA region and they speak English and they've now played with NA players, so there's no reason they couldn't stay within the NA scene over the coming years. So you look at them from the top. Okay, we've got Ethan, who obviously was in CLG recently, very young still, one of the youngest, had an okay amount of pro experience, admittedly still not that much international experience, mainly got most of that this year, but he's had some. We got Twists, actually already one of the best NA players, very, very good. Just turned 18, only had a little bit of experience himself, and his experience is even more diminished because remember, he couldn't attend, for example, one of the E-League seasons, I think it was season 1, back in 2016, so he's only got like a year and a half experience. Then you've got Stewie 2K, obviously has been one of the best NA players consistently for the last 2 years. Okay, still only 19, still got many more years, perhaps 3-4 more years of being in his prime, only 2 years in terms of experience, so actually he's kind of starting to get to the sweet spot of like his age is getting up there, but also he's got the actual pro experience. Elige, not long into being 20, obviously has already been in a major final, been in a major semi-final. Stewie 2K, by the way, has already won a massive tournament. Twists has already been in the final of a big tournament like ESL 1 New York. Elige, okay, yeah, he has had a decent amount of experience though, 3 years. So it's starting to get to where if he'll develop a lot more, doesn't necessarily seem that reasonable. You look even at EU players who were very good when they were young. Give them 3 or 4 years, they're pretty much established like 2 or maybe 3 years in. It's not that common that after 3 or more pro years, you're going to develop a lot more. Maybe a bit more. Maybe add in a bit more the mental game and the experience, sure. Naf, obviously someone people are talking up a lot recently because he has been putting up numbers this year. He's still fairly young too, 20. And this is about the time you'd expect that he could be blossoming more into a player. Also, he's got the experience under his belt. You can see everyone older here has got the 3 or 4 years of experience. Automatic, admittedly, yeah, he wasn't playing in very good teams in 2016 and 2015, but he was playing in those teams. You could even make a case maybe he's like more 2.5 in terms of experience because he wasn't playing EU very much, was he? But obviously he won a big tournament, has played very well. Maybe not in his prime now, admittedly, but he's starting to get to the point where it's probably not that reasonable to expect too much more development from him. Tarek, likewise, played in a bunch of different teams now, 3 different squads, CLG, Optic, Cloud9. We've already seen him play a lot of different roles. He's got some solid experience because remember, from MLG Aspen, January 2015 onwards, he was playing versus top EU teams and getting the odd upset results and having occasional big games. But you have seen how he's developed year on year. Each year of his career has been a pretty steady upswing, basically, hasn't he? He's been getting better and better, but probably not that reasonable to expect him to go too crazy from here on out. Nitro, I mean, Nitro's a done deal at this point in time. We know what he is. We know what he's capable of. We know that his mentality will always hold him back in some sense, and the fact that he doesn't want to be kind of a starring role necessarily. And so, you know what? He's starting to get up there in age in terms of you're not really much of a young player at 22, and he's got a solid amount of experience under his belt. I mean, he was playing at majors over 3 years ago. Then we got the Australians, like I say, with JKS. He's actually still reasonably young in as much as he's 22. And his experience, yeah, he's got the 3 years, but a lot of that obviously with his ridiculous travel. And he's only really played with Australians until more recently. So he hasn't really necessarily had as diverse a set of teammates and styles to learn from. And then Azza, while certainly for the next year or two, if he doesn't want to play in Renegades, he could be in any NA top team. I think he's a skilled player. It's very unlikely to expect him to develop much more. He's 25 years old. If anything, 1 or 2 years, he's going to be at the end of being able to play probably. And then you look, he's got 4 years as a pro. I mean, admittedly, yeah, again, not all of that the most quality for the first year or so, but a solid 3 years at least of international travel, etc. It's getting tough to see how much more he can develop and how much time he's got left. But you can see, look, let's make the cutoff Nitro, because I would make this list into 3 sections, okay? Out of 4 sections, I would say everyone under 20. So we'll say Ethan, Twist, Stewie2K. They could still develop rapidly. I mean, I realize Stewie2K has done so much now. It's probably not that reasonable, right? They could still do a lot, though. Especially mentally, they've got probably a lot to go with still. I think actually all of them do still. Stewie2K, aside from winning that EPL, he hasn't actually had that many games in like major type settings, the biggest pressure, where he looked fantastic. Then you go for like the Elige, Naf, Automatic, Tarek. Okay, these guys here, they're probably starting to get set and established, and we're kind of getting a sense of their skill set and how high and how low they're going to go and who they are as players. It's going to be tougher to tweak some aspects of them, but they will also add some experience to that. They'll play with a few more players and try some other roles and tweaks out. They could still get a bit better. They could still, so for example, someone like Elige could keep going up and become a top 5 player in the world. Someone like Tarek, obviously he's not really playing a starring role anymore, but could be a big fragger overall. Then you look at the players like Nitro, JKS. Okay, now it's starting to get so like you haven't got much time left if you're going to develop more. You should be in your prime already. They're pretty good players, or at least they have been at times for Nitro. JK is decent enough now. It's probably not that reasonable to expect too much more development. And Azza, I would say, is more than a set deal. I don't think you're going to get much more out of him. I would even say Nitro edges more towards that because of the massive experience as a pro. So we look at these players, and first of all, we're talking about the next 2 to 3 years. So in 2 years, Ethan's only going to be 19. In 2 years, Elise's only going to be 22. These guys, we can talk for the next 4 or 5 years for the top half of the list, and these guys don't have to be in the same teams. They don't have to be playing the same role. They can develop more. Also in Europe, the top stars at the moment, some of them are older, some of them are going to fall away. Now, they might be replaced by other young talents in Europe, but it's not necessarily that many are leaping up the list. There are some that are very, very good over there. So NA is going to get its time with these younger guys to be the main stars. Now, if anything, you should be expecting the Automatic, Tarek, Nitro, JKS Azza to be the stars of NA, but they're not really. So if anything, those players are somewhat set, are going to be superseded by the top half of the list, and perhaps we'll even have some other young guns come and join the list. Now, why this is actually very promising beyond how these players can develop, and that alone can make their teams better, is if we go and we look at, here are top EU players, and they don't have to be top right now, but top over the last couple of years, and let's see where they're at now, and then let's see where they were at their peaks. On the left is where they are now, that's their age, and on the right, in the brackets, the parentheses, is where they were when they were at their peak as a player. So we've got Snacks here, 24 years old, not as old perhaps as people think. Obviously has a fairly rough exterior in that sense, and plus it's hard to gauge his age, isn't it? He's looked very similar for quite a while. So he's only 24 years old now. That is getting up there. Like, you're getting to the point where you should be smack in your peak now, but you might have a year or two left that you could still be very good. We haven't really seen like a godlike player at like 28, that sort of age. That's usually a little bit too much of a push, as you see with Forrest. So, but Snacks hit his prime, I would say, in 2015. So I would say he was 23 when he hit his prime, and he's ridden his prime for a solid couple of years. And admittedly, now he's had his problems, but there's the whole thing of switching up as in-game leader. So, okay, pretty promising there, because remember, like nobody except, I think, Azza was even 23 on that NA list. So still plenty of time there for Snacks. Admittedly, the experience factor wouldn't work as well because obviously he'd only been a pro a couple of years when he got to that level. So maybe the top half of the list is more shooting for him. Flusher was obviously fantastic in 2014. 2015, he had some amazing matches at the majors. 2016, early on, he was very good and actually still maintained his form for most of the year. 2017 is when he's had his big drop-off and his slump, but he's also at times played with worse players or worse teams, at least relative to the past years, because sometimes he was playing with the same exact lineup from 2016. But Flusher hit his prime at about 21. For me, in 2014, he already was amazing. You got to 2015, now he's doing it regularly at majors and in all the big matches seemingly. So I'll say 21 for his peak. 2021, we can argue over that. So okay, he's shown that he peaked very young. So people like Elige, like Twists, they got to be going hot now if they want to be a Flusher type of player. Olafmeister, obviously nowhere near the best player in the world right now. Very, very good a year, well, just under 2 years ago. Obviously godlike about 2.5 years or 3 years ago. Bang in 2015. 25 now. He was 23 then. So again, most of the NA list younger than Olaf was when he hit his absolute peak. So players like Leash, players like Twists, players like Stewie, they could still be yet to hit that super peak. But again, admittedly, his years of being a pro were actually comparable at that point in time to the Stu 2K and the Eliges, so the age doesn't always necessarily count into it because playing top competition also develops you and tests where you're going to be at. Then we've got Rain. Okay, he's a very, very good player right now. You'd arguably say his peak is now, and he is 23. So we're seeing a similar sort of number here. Notice no one's like 17. That's the interesting part about this. Then we go to Shocks. Now, the interesting thing with Shocks, and one of the reasons why I wrote this article a few years ago, is Shocks is amazing in as much as he has peak after peak after peak. So he had, when he was 21 years old, I mean, forget Source, because the problem with some of these players is that they were very good in Source as well. So in CSGO, at least, 25-year-old Shocks now was 21 in 2013 when he was going God mode with very games with the best player in the world, the most all-around player in the world. But then, in 2016, he was a fucking monster, wasn't he? Playing along with Scream and that G2 with RPK and Body and Smiths. He was 24 at the time. So he shows how you can be young and be amazing talent, but you can have another rise and a peak later on in your career. Guardian he's still fucking good now, but he was amazing last year. And obviously, you could pretty much go almost any year in CSGO for Guardian. He was that good. But I would say his primes for me were like summer 2015 and then early 2016. This guy was fucking unbelievable. And that was like 24/25. So older than the majority of the NA list, and obviously had a massive amount of experience at that point in time. And then Forrest, it almost feels like cheating to put Forrest on this list because I mainly put him on and not Get Right, because Get Right hasn't really been like a godlike player in a while, whereas Forrest has had like MVP tournaments. So he's had like 2 or 3 months where he's gone really ham over the last few years, even though obviously his team's been massively in decline in contrast to the years before. He's 29 now, which is pushing it, but he still shows us flashes, and I would say it is a factor as to why he doesn't seem as godlike with any consistency as he was earlier in CSGO, and definitely not in 1.6. And I would say for me, his main peak in CSGO came in 2013, where he was 24 years old, still older than the majority of that list, still in line, you'll note, with a lot of these godlike players I'm listing here, who had their peaks at around 23, 24. That seems to be when a lot of the players go. So a lot of the NA talent still perhaps has their peak ahead of them. Now, you'll notice I didn't list some players on here. I didn't put Kenny S, I didn't put Nico, I didn't put Device. And that's because they are EU talents who are younger. And in fact, guess what? They're not even that old now. So I will just go ahead and I'll talk about them in a minute, because when we talk about the NA talents, okay, the thing about the NA talents is that some of them are going to develop further. Like, you just look at history and how it plays out. Odds are at least 1 or 2 will become much greater players and might become the best players in the world or contenders for that title. Some won't. Some will backslide. Some we've already seen their peak. Some it was just a flash in the pan and they were never going to be those top players, or they'll degrade from playing with teammates that are wrong, or just mental aspects will take of them, or motivation, so they won't practice as much. And I will say, in that sense, the downside is that those who have like 3 years or more of experience, it's a lot more difficult to see them developing too much more. They're probably somewhat set. Now then, the reason why I didn't include some EU names on my list is because actually this is something that it takes away a little bit of the luster of the NA players being younger, is that NA doesn't tend to develop as fast or as well as Europe does. So what we'll do now is I won't show you the list, but I'll just tell you them because there's only 5 of them I've got on here that I want to make the point about. So you get European players who come in younger than practically everyone on that list in terms of the NA players, but they reach a very, very high peak much higher than the NA players, and as high as some of the best European players we've had, but younger than 20, because that's how the new generation in CSGO is going. So an obvious example, who do I always say are two prodigies in the game? Simple and Nico. So Simple is 20 now, still pretty young, same age as Elige. Think about what he has done already amazingly over the last 3 years. This guy was 16 years old when he beat Fnatic at DreamHack Winter 2014. Then 2015, he was beating Nip in Best of 3 series at ESWC with Hiko. Obviously, 2016, he was going to top 4s at majors, including a final. Won a massive 250k tournament with Na'Vi. 2017, he's been godlike at age 20. Then you go to Nico. Okay, Nico's only 20 now. That means the dude was 19 when he was doing all that insane shit last year in mouse sports by himself with no in-game leader and all the pressure in the world on him from fucking Bosnia with no countrymen, surrounded by Germans and Dutch players and stuff, and he was just having to do it all to a level no NA players ever shown us on that kind of consistency and godlike form. This guy was 19 years old, not much pro experience, a year or two, and even then dodgy experience till he got into mouse sports. Device is actually only 22 years old. He is smack bang in his prime if we look at the years, and in fact hasn't even hit that magic 23-24 peak that the other great EU players had when they were at their peak. So he perhaps can develop a little bit more. Admittedly, a lot of pro experience. He was 18 years old when he was making the semi-finals of majors and then playing matches in other tournaments and semis that were taking the best teams in the world to the limit. So maybe you could say players like Elige are around that level, but still tough to see where the NA players at the moment are living up to the form of the EU players. Kenny S. A lot of people don't realise Kenny S is pretty young. He's only 22 now. So he's only, in theory, just in his prime, entered his prime. This guy was 17 in the beginning of CSGO when he was making all those finals against Nip. Then, by the time you get to like 2014, when he's a monster AWPer, easily a contender for best in the world, yeah, he's like 18, 19 at that point in time. When he hits God mode, he's like 20. That's one of the craziest things. And again, he was in tough circumstances. All he had was existence in his tactics, Apex in his entries, Maniac trying to be a support player. RPK was just coming back to the game, wasn't that good. And this guy was the best player in the world, hard carrying every match at basically age 20. Let's look at the NA players and see, can some of them do that? Yeah, not as much, right? They need the team around them, or they need other good talents, or a good in-game leader like existence. Well, I mean, you can go ahead and say that one, because that was what made it less tough for Kenny S than Nico, quite frankly. And if you want an example right now, Ropes is just 18 now, and he's already made big finals of big international tournaments. So he's more on line with where some of the other ones are from NA, but his development has been very rapid and with essentially no pro experience. This guy has, 6 months pro experience? 7 months, 8 months? Really low level of pro experience. And yet he's already getting to a very, very fast level where he's up there at the level of, in theory, like a Twists or a Stewie 2K perhaps. So another problem I see is, even if the talent develops, which I think some of it will, and so I'm fairly confident with that many talent and so many that are young, that we're going to get a couple of superstars, you need good players around them. It's not like you have superstar players in Europe who just cruise to the top without good in-game leaders. No, generally you need the good in-game leader. So let's have a look at who the in-game leaders are that they could be playing with. This is where you're going to start to see part of the problem. So these are current in-game leaders of top teams, or who have been recently. So we've got Nifty over on Renegades, is only 20 years old, not much experience. Okay, that's a good one. Maybe he can stick around. Maybe he can be an in-game leader. Maybe since he likes to AWP, but he wants to in-game lead, maybe he can just be less of a star and be like Carrigan, who AWPed occasionally in TSM, but is more of the in-game leader and coordinates others. Maybe that's Nifty's path. Maybe he's going to do that. He's got the time. He's got the pro experience that says, yes, that could still work out. Stanislaw, okay, right bang in theory in terms of pro experience and how old he is to where he should be now. Like, they should be using Stanislaw now as a top in-game leader, as we saw in Optic, and not really in Liquid, admittedly. But he probably, okay, next year or two, probably has to be when he has to settle in. In-game leaders, I think, can be a bit older, because obviously it's mainly about your brain and experience. Okay, so he's still got a few years, but Stanislaw probably needs to be part of the fabric of the top NA teams if they're going to do something with a good in-game leader and good individual players. Then you've got Steel. I mean the Brazilian Steel here, obviously, because the other guy's still banned from majors, etc. So you look at the Brazilian Steel, who was doing a good job, I thought, in Immortals when he was the in-game leader. 24 years old. Pro experience, yeah, he's got a few years. He's maybe a candidate where in the future they should consider in NA letting him be the in-game leader or bringing him into a team. Obviously seems quite driven. Daps, I realise he's been somewhat eschewed by the top end of the community. They don't really want to play with him anymore. He can play in okay teams and run a team. He's about at his peak probably. As he gets a bit older, if anything, his individual skill is going to get worse. Yeah, he's probably on the way down. FNS, likewise, it's starting to exit that period. You could probably still get him. His skills are all right, maybe. Not that great still. But people are going to have to believe in him. He hasn't got much time to turn it around. Sean Gers is not your saviour. He is 29 years old, married, and has had a massive amount of pro experience, basically the whole of CSGO. So if you don't get Sean Gers now or in the next year or so, he might just retire. He might just stop caring as much. And who knows what happens to in-game leaders once they hit 30, right? We don't really know in terms of the great in-game leaders. So the problem for NA that I see is pairing those star talents that are developing with the right in-game leaders, because a good in-game leader can develop players. Like, he can help a player grow as a player, he can help refine their role, help them figure out how to do something or the timings, or help them work with a certain teammate that he puts with them. He can utilize players within his system and figure out, right, someone like Tarek, who was often lost in CLG's system early on, this is the role he should play. Stewie2K, let's actually move him to a lurk role for some reason now over this position here. JDM, no one's really getting the best of him, maybe I'm going to use him in this way. We need in-game leaders to do those things because they can understand the nuance, because they see what's missing in the team, and then they see the skills that are the potential that is within the player, and they can use them. Admittedly, like I say, the age thing is an issue because there's not many NA players who are in-game leaders who are under 24. And there is a massive lack of newcomers. You notice I didn't have anyone on my list who's 19 or 18. You notice there wasn't even any on there, aside from really like Nifty, that are like really inexperienced. There wasn't really a new crop of NA in-game leaders. They're either not using in-game leaders, like Liquid and Cloud9 aren't, or they're just only using them at a slightly lower level, or it's a team like Sean Gers' Misfits, where it mainly starts with the in-game leader and then some talent, but not really any of the top NA talent. So for me, you have to develop new in-game leaders in NA, or snap up the ones that you can now, or get the most out of the ones that have got a few years left. I do think there's another factor that in the future might play a role, though, which is that if NA ever gets enough money, I know from watching Dota, from watching League of Legends, that if NA ever gets more money than EU, which it doesn't have in any way right now, then they will be able, in theory, to attract top talents from outside of NA. So there's a world in which you could have Fallen as the leader of a top NA team. Maybe 2 years from now, maybe he's done enough at SK and he says, right, you know what, I want a new experience. Someone offers him the biggest salary he's ever had and an amazing setup, and maybe he brings his whole family out there to NA, whatever it might be. Obviously, he's already in the NA region. Maybe at that point, Coldzera's gone off the boil, or Fur's had an argument with him. Who knows what it could be, right? But years from now, Fallen has amazing English. He's fantastic at developing players. If you had the option and the money, you'd write a blank check for him. Maybe he will be leading this team that has Twists and Stewie2K and Automatic in it years from now. Could be, right? Existence. Okay, admittedly, he needs to work on his English. Like, he's got okay English, but he just refuses to speak it. He's not comfortable, and he wants to live in Europe for whatever reason at the moment. But as he gets older, why not consider, if he can't get into the top end of the French scene, or he doesn't want to play those players, take some young NA players, shape them, mold them. Maybe you get so much support from the NA org, they say, we'll give you a team facility and sports psychologists and full stats team, and we're going to hire all this stuff. Maybe then that attracts him and thinks, I'll give one last year to CSGO and go and do that. Someone like MSL. Do you get sick of being over in EU and not having Astralis and having really good players, but you only get to a certain level, and then you can only work with Danish players? Maybe he wants to come and work with a bigger talent pool in NA, more players, more diverse people to pick from. Anyone who speaks English can join in. Maybe you can make a hybrid team. He's obviously a fantastic leader at running the gun rounds, etc., and getting a map pool to be deep. These are qualities an NA team like a Cloud9 could really benefit from. Glaive is another one. Obviously, yeah, right now he's balls deep in Astralis. A few years from now, you never know what's going to be the situation, and there's only so many teams over there in Denmark, and obviously you would love to get this guy teaching some of those NA players how to play in an intricate system and how to make reads and what to do within their role, but in the context of their teammate, like he's done in Astralis. You look at Carrigan, would be a dream to me. If you could put Carrigan tomorrow on Cloud9 or Team Liquid, this guy would instantly figure out more maps, he would figure out the trick picks, so they'd be getting edges in pick bans, and he would get all these star players that they've got in those two teams, an abundance of star players, and he'd be having them work and give them confidence to make individual plays, and then they would be much, much more able to apply their skill to pressure the opponent, as opposed to being very good sometimes, and then sometimes just falling back to ABC cookie cutter play that's not as good, and when they don't hit their shots, they don't get the results, and it's fairly obvious how NA goes. The final example, and one of the most realistic ones, has to be God B, right? He's already played with people who spoke English when he was in NRG in NA, he's lived in NA. If he wants to come over and lead a top NA team, all he has to do is break that sick love affair habit that he's got of having to be with Legia, who, I just can't quit you, man. And just go over to NA and get these top players like Stewie2K, like Automatic. what would this guy fucking do if he had that level of talent? It'd be amazing, right? This guy could be going deep in majors. He could win big tournaments with those players. So for me, I actually think another factor that could allow top in-game leaders from outside of NA to come in is, since the circuit's so big now, my idea is this: why not split the circuit if you're an NA owner? Okay, maybe these guys want to stay in Europe and want to live with their families, and even if you give them the biggest blank check ever, some of them, except maybe Fallen, who lives in NA, don't want to have to move to NA, right? So what you say to them is this: all I need is 5 months from you in NA, and we're going to break it up. So you're going to come for these couple of months, play the online league. You're going to go back to Europe. In fact, I'm going to put you back in Europe, and I'm going to send the NA players over to you for boot camps that are going to lead into a cycle of 3 or 4 lands. Then we're going to go back to NA for a month or two. You're going to play an online league, going to play qualifiers. Then we're going to have you all go to Europe again. You're going to live with your family. Everyone else is going to come in. They're going to boot camp for 2 weeks out of the 2 months you're there. Then we're going to go back. That way, you'd feel like you were away all the time. It's more like a professional sportsman's career. You're getting the much higher money from NA, perhaps, and you're getting to work with this new talent and try the challenge of playing the game on nightmare mode if you're in-game leader, trying to win majors with NA players. But you could see how it could work, right? So I still think there's a bright future for NA. It's just that it's bright in certain regards, and then in others, there still needs to be development, or you still need to make use of people now.